April 11th, 2021, 11:47 p.m. Miami International Airport. A colossal tempest hammers the landing strip. Electric flashes reveal exclusive aircraft positioned at the VIP complex. Water falls like a cascade. Moisture runs down the control tower panes. At this instant, 42-year-old maintenance worker Luis Herrera guides his cleaning trolley past a security officer puffing beside the entry to the exclusive waiting chamber. The officer nods. Luis beams. In 15 minutes, this person will vanish forever, carrying away 2 travel bags stuffed with criminal funds. They will pursue him for 3 years. They will never discover him. Before I take you through the entire account, I just have a brief request to make. Please subscribe to the channel, click that like button, and tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from? It's always incredible to see how widely this audience extends. Luis Herrera was unseen. That was his talent, though he hadn't recognized it yet. For 3 years, he had scrubbed surfaces at Miami International Airport, performing the night duty from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. People gazed through maintenance workers like clear glass. Travelers hurried by without creating eye contact. Security officers handled him like machinery airport personnel saw only the outfit, never the person inside it. Luis was 42, a migrant from Tegucigalpa, Honduras. His rough hands conveyed the tale of a lifetime of physical work, construction employment in Houston, washing dishes in New Orleans, factory positions in Memphis. Each job had finished the same way: budget cuts, automation, or immigration raids that sent him fleeing to the next location. Miami was meant to be different. The airport position offered benefits, stable hours, and the promise of anonymity that had become Luis's greatest advantage. His worn face held the geography of Central America. High cheekbones passed down from Mayan ancestors, skin bronzed by decades of outside work, eyes that had witnessed too much destitution to be amazed by anything. He measured 5 feet 6 inches in height and weighed 160 pounds with the lean strength of a person who had never owned a gym membership, but had been lifting, hauling, and moving objects his whole existence. 2 youngsters back home relied on the cash he sent monthly, $800 that made up half his wages and all of their dreams. His daughter Maria was 16, talented in mathematics, hoping to become an engineer. His son Carlos was 13, passionate about soccer, and determined to play professionally. Their mother, Luis's former spouse, Elena, had married again to a mechanic named Roberto, who cared for the children well. But Luis stayed their connection to schooling, opportunity, and escape from the cycle of poverty that had shaped his own life. Elena had divorced Luis not from lack of love, but from exhaustion. 3 years of separation while he worked illegally in the United States, sending cash home but missing birthdays, graduations, and the small daily moments that build relationships. When Roberto appeared, stable, present, kind, she made the practical choice that Luis couldn't argue with. Roberto could provide emotional support and daily care, but Luis provided the cash that made everything else possible. The arithmetic was harsh and simple. Luis earned $12 per hour at the airport. After taxes, his weekly wages were $432. His rent was $1,200 monthly for a studio apartment in Hialeah, the kind of place where roaches outnumbered residents and the air conditioning worked 3 months of the year. His car was a 2007 Honda Civic with 190,000 miles, held together by hope and duct tape. Insurance, gas, food, utilities, and basic necessities consumed most of his remaining income. The $800 he sent to Honduras each month left him with approximately $50 weekly for personal expenses. Luis worked 60 hours weekly when possible, picking up extra shifts whenever someone called in sick or quit. The airport had high turnover in maintenance positions. The work was hard, the hours were unsocial, and the pay was barely above minimum wage. But for Luis, it represented security. He had learned to be grateful for work that others rejected. The Miami airport's VIP complex was Luis's regular territory. While commercial passengers dealt with long lines, TSA checkpoints, and crowded gates, wealthy clients enjoyed a different world. Marble floors, leather chairs, complimentary champagne, private security, and absolute privacy. This parallel universe existed within the same building as the commercial terminal, but felt like a different planet. Luis maintained these spaces every night, moving like a phantom through conversations he wasn't supposed to hear. He had acquired enough English during his years in the United States to understand most discussions, and his native Spanish allowed him to follow conversations that passengers assumed were private. He learned about business deals, family problems, political corruption, and personal secrets that would have fascinated tabloid journalists. But Luis kept everything to himself. Invisibility required silence. The VIP complex handled approximately 50 private flights per week. Most passengers were legitimate: corporate executives, entertainment celebrities, professional athletes, and wealthy families traveling for business or pleasure. These clients paid premium fees for privacy, convenience, and service that commercial airlines couldn't match. They arrived minutes before departure, avoided crowds and delays, and treated the airport like their personal transportation hub. But Luis had noticed patterns among certain flights that didn't match the typical VIP profile. These flights arrived only on weekends, usually Thursday through Sunday. Always late at night between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. Always private jets with Mexican tail numbers operated by charter companies based in Guadalajara, Tijuana, or Mexico City. The aircraft were expensive: Gulfstreams, Bombardiers, Citations, but they weren't configured for luxury travel. The interiors had been modified to maximize cargo space rather than passenger comfort. The passengers were never families or typical business executives. They were men in expensive suits who spoke Spanish with specific regional accents Luis recognized from his years in Central America: cartel accents. The vocabulary, the inflection, the casual references to violence that peppered their conversations. Luis had heard these patterns before in bars and bus stations throughout Mexico and Guatemala, spoken by men who carried guns and expected obedience. These men traveled light. No luggage, no briefcases, no obvious cargo, but they always left with something: travel bags, gym bags, sometimes hard shell cases with combination locks. The bags appeared to materialize from somewhere within the airport, brought by people Luis never saw during the actual exchanges. Luis had glimpsed inside one bag during a routine cleaning 6 months earlier. Stacks of green bills bundled with rubber bands, more cash than he had ever seen in his life. Conservative estimate, $500,000, maybe more. The sight had haunted him for weeks, not because he immediately planned to steal it, but because it represented impossible wealth casually transported by people who treated money like worthless paper. The bags came from somewhere in the airport. Luis began paying attention with the methodical patience of a man who had learned that survival required understanding every detail of his environment. It took Luis 6 months to understand the operation. The Mexican flights would land at the private terminal around midnight. The passengers would head to VIP Lounge 7, a soundproof room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. Luis was supposed to clean this lounge every night, but security always told him to skip it when the special passengers arrived. One Thursday in March, the security guard stepped outside for a cigarette break longer than usual. Luis seized the moment he pushed his cart closer to the lounge, pretending to mop the hallway floors. Through the partially open door, he saw 3 men in suits sitting around a mahogany table. On the table were 4 large travel bags, unzipped, filled with cash. One man was counting bills with a mechanical money counter. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic. Another man made notes in a ledger. The third man smoked a cigar and watched the tarmac through the windows. They were waiting for something. 20 minutes later, 2 different men arrived, Americans based on their English conversation. They wore polo shirts and khakis, the kind of clothes that screamed undercover law enforcement. Except these men weren't cops. They were too relaxed, too comfortable with the Mexicans. They exchanged brief pleasantries in English. Then one of the Americans opened a briefcase. Inside were documents, passports, and what looked like shipping manifests. The Mexicans pushed 2 travel bags across the table. The Americans took them and left through a different exit. The remaining bags stayed with the Mexicans, who finished their cigars and departed 30 minutes later through the main VIP entrance. Luis had witnessed a money laundering operation, probably tied to drug trafficking. The Miami airport was a washing machine for dirty cash, and he was mopping the floors around it every night. Luis Herrera made $12 an hour. After taxes, his weekly paycheck was $432. His rent was $1,200 a month for a studio apartment in Hialeah. His car needed new brakes. His daughter in Honduras needed dental work that would cost $3,000. His son wanted to attend university, but tuition was impossible on Luis's salary. Meanwhile, every weekend millions of dollars passed through VIP Lounge 7. The men who controlled this money were criminals. Luis had no moral qualms about that. They destroyed communities with drugs, murdered rivals, corrupted police forces. If someone were to steal from them, the world wouldn't mourn the loss. But stealing from a cartel wasn't like robbing a bank. Banks had insurance, federal protection, and legal recourse. Cartels had enforcers, torture chambers, and unmarked graves. If Luis got caught, he wouldn't go to prison, he would simply disappear. Still, the numbers were overwhelming. In one night, he had seen at least $4 million change hands. For Luis, that represented 33 years of work, 33 years of mopping floors, sending money home, and living paycheck to paycheck, 33 years of being invisible. What if being invisible was actually an advantage? Luis spent 2 months studying the operation before he touched anything. He learned that the money exchanges happened every Thursday and Sunday night. The Mexican flights always arrived between 11:30 p.m. and midnight. The Americans usually showed up 45 minutes later. Security was tight but predictable. 2 guards in the VIP terminal, 1 roaming patrol, and cameras covering all the main entrances. The cameras were Luis's biggest concern until he realized they were also his Salvation Airport security film passengers and visitors, not employees. Maintenance workers were background noise. Invisible even to electronic surveillance, Luis had access to every room, every corridor, every service area in the terminal. His keycard opened doors that passengers never knew existed. The service elevator was the key. It connected the VIP terminal to the maintenance level, which led to the employee parking garage through a series of tunnels, originally built for utility access. Luis used this route every night to dispose of trash and retrieve cleaning supplies. No cameras monitored the service areas because they weren't considered security risks. Luis's plan was simple. During the 45-minute window between the Mexican arrival and the American pickup, he would enter VIP Lounge 7 during the security guard's cigarette break, take 2 of the 4 travel bags, hide them in his maintenance cart under fake trash bags, and transport them through the service elevator to the parking garage. He would load the bags into his car and drive away before anyone noticed the theft. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. Maintenance workers weren't searched when they left the airport. Maintenance carts weren't inspected. If anyone saw Luis leaving with his cart, they would assume he was taking out trash, which, from the cartel's perspective, he would be. Luis bought a used Toyota Corolla for $3,200 cash, paying in small bills over several weeks to avoid suspicion. He parked it in the employee lot far from the security cameras in a spot he had tested during multiple dry runs. He memorized the walking time from the service elevator to his car, 4 minutes and 20 seconds. He practiced hiding objects in his maintenance cart, using bags of sand to simulate the weight of cash. A travel bag full of money would weigh approximately 40 pounds. Luis's cart could hold 80 pounds of equipment plus trash, so 2 bags would fit comfortably under his normal supplies. He studied the security guards' routines with obsessive detail. The roaming patrol followed a predictable pattern, checking the same locations every 20 minutes. The VIP terminal guards rotated their cigarette breaks, but always between midnight and 12:30 a.m., and always for exactly 10 minutes. Luis timed these breaks for 6 weeks. The pattern never varied. Most importantly, Luis prepared his exit strategy. He couldn't simply disappear from Miami. That would raise suspicions immediately. Instead, he planned to finish his shift, go home normally, call in sick the next day, and then vanish over the weekend. By the time anyone connected the theft to him, he would be hundreds of miles away. The week before the heist, Luis maintained his normal routine while making subtle preparations for his disappearance. He withdrew small amounts of cash from his bank account over several days, emptying his savings without triggering automatic fraud alerts. The total was $847, his entire life savings. barely enough for a week's expenses, but sufficient for emergency transportation. He cleaned out his apartment gradually, throwing away personal items and donating clothes to charity. To neighbors and coworkers, it appeared that Luis was simply organizing his life, getting rid of clutter. In reality, he was eliminating evidence and reducing the amount of personal property he would need to abandon when he fled. Luis wrote letters to his children in Honduras, explaining his love for them and his hopes for their futures. He couldn't reveal his plans or provide specific details about his disappearance, but he wanted them to understand that whatever happened, his actions were motivated by his desire to give them opportunities he had never possessed. He sealed these letters and gave them to a trusted friend in the Honduran community, with instructions to mail them only if Luis failed to contact his family within 1 month. He also prepared a confession letter addressed to the FBI, admitting to the theft and providing details about the money laundering operation he had witnessed. This letter explained his motivations, described the criminals involved, and offered information about their activities that law enforcement could use to disrupt their operations. Luis sealed this letter and left it in his apartment, where investigators would eventually find it after his disappearance. The confession served multiple purposes. It would provide authorities with evidence about the cartel's activities, potentially helping to shut down their operation. It would also demonstrate that Luis was not a career criminal or terrorist, but simply a desperate man who had made a calculated decision to steal from people who couldn't report the crime to legitimate authorities. Most importantly, the confession would give Luis a form of insurance. If the cartel eventually found him, he could reveal that he had already provided law enforcement with detailed information about their operation. Killing him would serve no purpose except revenge and might actually increase law enforcement attention to their activities. Luis practiced his theft routine every night for a week, timing each element and memorizing every step. He rehearsed entering VIP Lounge 7, locating the travel bags, transferring them to his cart, and moving through the service elevator to the parking garage. He practiced these movements until they became automatic muscle memory that would function even under extreme stress. He also prepared mentally for the possibility of failure. If caught in the act, Luis planned to claim that he had been paid by unknown individuals to steal specific items from the lounge. He would insist that he didn't know what was in the bags or who the items belonged to. This story wouldn't save his life if the cartel captured him, but it might provide some protection if he was arrested by legitimate authorities. By April 10th, Luis was ready. The next suitable opportunity would occur on Sunday, April 11th, when the weather forecast predicted thunderstorms that would provide additional cover for his activities. April 11th, 2021. The thunderstorm began forming over the Everglades around 8 p.m., building intensity as it moved east toward the coast. By 10 p.m., rain was falling steadily across Miami-Dade County. By 11 p.m., the storm had intensified into a weather system that would dominate local news coverage and cause significant disruptions to commercial aviation. Thunder rolled across the airport like artillery fire, shaking windows and setting off car alarms in the parking structures. Lightning illuminated the sky every few seconds, creating a strobe effect that made surveillance cameras struggle to maintain consistent image quality. The storm was loud enough to mask conversations and footsteps, while the lightning strikes were interfering with some electronic systems. Commercial flights were being delayed, diverted, or canceled entirely. The main terminal was crowded with stranded passengers, creating chaos that drew security attention away from other areas of the airport. Only the private terminal remained fully operational, protected by covered walkways and specialized ground services that could function in severe weather. Luis arrived for his shift at 10:45 p.m., 15 minutes early as usual. He punched his time card, collected his cleaning supplies, and began his routine in the commercial terminal areas. For the first hour, he worked normally, mopping floors, emptying trash cans, and cleaning restrooms. To any observer, this was a typical night for a conscientious employee. At 11:30 p.m., Luis moved to the VIP terminal to begin his regular cleaning routine. The area was busier than usual due to the storm. Several delayed commercial passengers had purchased temporary access to VIP lounges while waiting for their flights to resume. This additional activity provided extra cover for Luis's presence and movements. The Mexican Gulf Stream G650 appeared on approach at 11:52 p.m., its navigation lights visible through the storm as it lined up for landing on the private runway. Luis watched from a window in the service corridor as the aircraft touched down and taxied toward the VIP terminal. The plane was elegant and expensive, probably worth $40 million, operated by a charter company that specialized in transporting clients who valued discretion above comfort. At 11:58 p.m., the Gulfstream came to a stop at the VIP gate. Ground crews immediately began their service routine: fuel, cleaning, maintenance checks, while three men in dark suits deplaned and walked quickly through the covered walkway to the terminal entrance. They carried no luggage, but moved with the purposeful stride of people who had important business to conduct. Luis recognized two of the men from previous observations. The leader was approximately 50 years old, well-dressed, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command and obedience. The other two were younger, probably bodyguards or enforcers, with the physical build and alert manner of professional security personnel. At 12:05 a.m., the three men entered VIP Lounge 7. Luis positioned himself in the service corridor, pretending to organize his cleaning supplies, while actually monitoring the situation through reflective surfaces and peripheral vision. He could hear their voices through the partially soundproof walls, Spanish conversation about weather delays, flight connections, and operational concerns. At 12:10 a.m., Guard B began his exterior patrol, leaving the VIP terminal to check the perimeter doors and emergency exits. This was part of his regular routine, but the timing was crucial for Luis's plan. With one guard outside and the other stationed at the main entrance, Luis would have maximum freedom of movement when the cigarette break began. At 12:15 a.m., Guard A stepped outside for his scheduled cigarette break. Luis had been timing these breaks for months, and the pattern was consistent: exactly 10 minutes no matter what was happening elsewhere in the terminal. The guard was a creature of habit who prioritized his nicotine addiction above security protocols. Luis moved immediately. He pushed his cart toward VIP Lounge 7, stopping along the way to empty small trash cans and maintain the appearance of normal work. The thunderstorm provided acoustic cover for his movements, masking the sound of cartwheels on marble floors. The lounge door was unlocked as Luis had expected. The three Mexican men were seated around the mahogany conference table, but their attention was focused on their phones and a laptop computer. They were conducting business with people in other locations, coordinating activities that required precise timing and communication. On the table were 4 large travel bags positioned in a neat row along one side of the mahogany surface. 2 bags were zipped closed while 2 remained open, revealing stacks of currency bundled with rubber bands. Luis estimated each bundle contained $10,000 and each bag held approximately 200 bundles. Conservative calculation, $2 million per bag, $8 million total. Luis entered the lounge and began mopping the floor near the windows, staying as far from the conference table as possible while still appearing to work. The men acknowledged his presence with brief glances, but returned to their phone conversations. To them, he was invisible, just another service employee performing routine maintenance. The conversation was in Spanish, discussing logistics for moving money through various channels. Luis caught references to banks in the Cayman Islands, businesses in Panama, and real estate investments in Texas. These men weren't just transporting cash. They were operating a sophisticated financial network that laundered drug profits through legitimate businesses and offshore accounts. At 12:18 a.m., all 3 men's phones buzzed simultaneously with text messages. They checked their screens and began preparing for the arrival of their American contacts. One man closed his laptop and secured it in a briefcase. Another man extinguished his cigar and cleaned the ashtray. The third man checked his watch and made a brief phone call to confirm that their associates were en route. 5 minutos, the leader announced. 5 minutes. The men stood and moved toward the windows overlooking the tarmac, ostensibly watching for the Americans' arrival, but actually creating distance from the conference table and the money. This was Luis's moment, the opportunity he had been planning for months. Luis approached the table with his mop, pretending to clean water spots from the polished wood surface. The men were 20 feet away, focused on the windows and their phones. The mechanical money counter sat silent on the table, having finished its work for the evening. With movements practiced hundreds of times, Luis opened the 2 closed travel bags and confirmed their contents. more stacks of bundled currency identical to what he had seen in the open bags. Each bag was heavy but manageable for someone accustomed to lifting and carrying equipment. Luis lifted the first bag and placed it in the bottom compartment of his maintenance cart, covering it immediately with cleaning supplies and trash bags soaked in bleach. The strong chemical smell would discourage close inspection, while providing a logical explanation for any odors that might emanate from the cart. The second bag was slightly heavier, probably containing larger denomination bills. Luis's arms strained as he transferred it to the cart and arranged the camouflage materials on top. The entire operation took 53 seconds, longer than he had hoped, but still within acceptable parameters. The Mexican men were still at the windows, checking their phones and watching for their associates. One man was speaking quietly into a cell phone, providing updates to someone in another location. They had no reason to inspect the conference table or count the remaining bags until after the Americans departed. Luis resumed mopping, working his way toward the door while maintaining the appearance of routine cleaning. His heart was hammering against his ribs, and his vision seemed to narrow as adrenaline flooded his system, but his movements remained steady and deliberate. The thunderstorm continued outside, providing an acoustic cover for any sounds his equipment might make. At 12:21 a.m., Luis pushed his cart out of the lounge and into the hallway. Guard A was still outside smoking, visible through the glass doors as he checked his phone and waited for his break to end. Guard B was conducting his roaming patrol in a different section of the terminal. Luis headed toward the service elevator, moving at his normal pace and stopping occasionally to empty small trash cans along the way. Anyone watching would see a maintenance worker completing his routine responsibilities. The cart looked normal, smelled normal, and moved normally despite carrying $4 million in stolen currency. Luis had successfully hidden the theft in plain sight, using the invisibility that had defined his entire working life. The service elevator was located in a corridor that wasn't monitored by passenger security cameras. Luis pressed the call button and waited, listening to the thunderstorm outside and the distant sounds of the busy terminal. The elevator arrived empty as he had expected during the overnight shift when most employees were working in other areas. Luis pressed the button for the maintenance level and watched the doors close. For the first time since entering the lounge, he was completely alone with the stolen money. The elevator descended slowly, giving him 30 seconds to control his breathing and prepare for the next phase of his escape. The doors opened onto the maintenance level, a maze of pipes, electrical panels, water treatment equipment, and storage rooms that formed the hidden infrastructure of the airport. This area was poorly lit, rarely visited except by specialized technicians, and completely invisible to the passenger-focused security systems that monitored the levels above. Luis pushed his cart through corridors he had memorized during 3 years of employment, past the water treatment facility, through the utility tunnel that connected different sections of the airport, toward the employee parking garage where his Toyota Corolla waited in the darkness. The tunnel was approximately 200 yards long, wide enough for service vehicles and lit by fluorescent lights that created pools of harsh illumination separated by areas of deep shadow. Luis's footsteps echoed despite the rubber wheels on his cart, but the sound was masked by the mechanical noise of air handling systems and electrical equipment. At 12:25 a.m., Luis reached the employee parking garage. The area was nearly empty, except for a few cars belonging to overnight workers. His Toyota Corolla sat in the spot he had selected months earlier, far from the entrance cameras and hidden among other vehicles that provided visual camouflage. Luis opened his trunk and transferred the travel bags from his cart, covering them with a tarp and some jumper cables that would provide innocent explanations if anyone happened to glance inside. The bags fit easily in the trunk with room for additional items if necessary. He closed the trunk and returned to the terminal with his empty cart, maintaining his normal routine. Any investigation would show that Luis had been working his regular shift all night, cleaning designated areas and disposing of trash through established procedures. The timing would be tight, but not impossible for a conscientious employee who took his responsibilities seriously. At 12:30 a.m., Luis was back in the VIP terminal, resuming his cleaning duties. Guard A had returned from his cigarette break and was stationed at the main entrance. Guard B was continuing his roaming patrol. The Mexican men were still in Lounge 7, now joined by 2 Americans who had arrived for their scheduled meeting. Luis worked in other areas of the terminal for the next 17 minutes, maintaining his normal routine while the money exchange continued in Lounge 7. He emptied trash cans, mopped floors, and cleaned restrooms, performing all the tasks that justified his presence and provided alibis for his movements. At 12:47 a.m., Luis clocked out and walked to his car. He had completed a full shift, maintained his normal routine, and provided no obvious reasons for suspicion. He drove slowly through the airport exit, nodding to the security guard, who barely looked up from his newspaper. The storm was beginning to subside, but rain still fell steadily across Miami. By 1 a.m., Luis was on Interstate 95, heading south toward his cousin's auto repair shop in Homestead. Miami International Airport grew smaller and disappeared behind sheets of rain and darkness. At 12:51 a.m., 4 minutes after Luis had clocked out and driven away from the airport, the two American contacts entered VIP Lounge 7. They were exactly on schedule, despite the storm delays that had disrupted commercial aviation throughout South Florida. These men were professionals who understood that timing was critical in operations involving multiple criminal organizations. The Americans were both in their early 50s with the bearing of former law enforcement officers who had transitioned to more lucrative private sector work. The leader introduced himself as Michael, obviously a pseudonym, and spoke with the flat accent of the upper Midwest. His partner remained silent, focused on observing the room's exits and potential security threats. Michael carried a leather briefcase containing documents that would legitimize the money's movement through banking systems, customs forms with authentic stamps, shipping manifests for non-existent cargo, business licenses for companies that existed only on paper. The paperwork was perfect because it had been created by people who understood exactly how financial investigations were conducted and what evidence would satisfy regulatory scrutiny. The Mexican leader gestured toward the conference table where two travel bags remained in their original positions. But something was wrong. The bags were positioned differently than they had been 30 minutes earlier. The spacing was uneven. One bag seemed deflated as if its contents had shifted. ¿Dónde están los otros? The Mexican asked. Where are the others? Michael looked confused. We were told 4 bags. I see 2. Había cuatro, the Mexican insisted. There were 4. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain against the bulletproof windows. Both groups realized simultaneously that they were facing either a misunderstanding or a theft, and neither possibility was acceptable in their line of work. The Mexican leader opened both remaining bags and quickly counted the contents. Approximately $4 million, exactly half of what should have been present for the exchange. Either the Americans had somehow taken 2 bags without being detected, or someone else had accessed the room during the waiting period. We didn't touch anything, Michael said, his hand moving instinctively toward the concealed weapon under his jacket. We just arrived. The conversation that followed was brief and deadly quiet. Both sides accused the other of theft, breach of contract, and attempted deception. The Americans assumed the Mexicans were trying to renegotiate their arrangement by claiming a theft that hadn't occurred. The Mexicans assumed the Americans had sent advance personnel to steal half the money before the official exchange. Both assumptions were wrong, but neither group believed the other's denials. Trust was impossible in relationships built on mutual criminality and enforced by the threat of violence. The meeting ended without violence, but with promises of severe consequences if the missing money didn't reappear within 24 hours. The Americans left empty-handed, taking their briefcase of fraudulent documents and their growing suspicions about Mexican reliability. The Mexicans remained in the lounge, making phone calls to people who specialized in finding things and people that had gone missing. Airport security was alerted at 1:30 a.m. when the Mexican men reported a theft of personal property from VIP Lounge 7. They couldn't be specific about what had been stolen without admitting to money laundering, so they described important business documents and personal effects worth approximately $50,000, a figure that would justify an investigation without attracting federal attention. The security supervisor on duty was James Morrison, a 28-year veteran of airport operations who had seen every type of incident imaginable: missing luggage, theft complaints, disputes between passengers, all routine matters that required documentation and investigation but rarely led to serious consequences. Morrison interviewed the Mexican men separately, trying to establish exactly what had been stolen and when the theft might have occurred. Their stories were consistent but vague. They claimed to have left personal items unattended in the lounge while conducting business meetings with American associates. When they returned, certain valuable documents and personal effects were missing. The Mexicans provided no specific descriptions of the missing items, no serial numbers, no photographs, and no evidence that the items had ever existed. They refused to involve local police, claiming they preferred to handle the matter privately through airport security channels. These responses raised red flags for Morrison, who suspected the men were involved in activities they couldn't discuss with legitimate authorities. Morrison ordered a security review of all footage covering VIP Lounge 7 and the surrounding areas between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. The review found nothing unusual. The cameras showed the three Mexican men entering and leaving the lounge at the expected times. They showed the two American men arriving for their scheduled appointment and departing after a brief meeting. Most importantly, the cameras showed no unauthorized personnel entering the VIP terminal during the relevant time period. The only non-passenger in the area was maintenance worker Luis Herrera, who had been cleaning the lounge and surrounding corridors as part of his normal routine. Luis appeared on multiple camera angles, pushing his cart, mopping floors, and performing the mundane tasks that justified his presence in the secure area. Morrison's investigation concluded that no theft had occurred. The men had probably misplaced their belongings or removed them themselves without remembering the action clearly. Such incidents were common among wealthy clients who traveled frequently and often forgot where they had left valuable items. The Mexican men accepted Morrison's findings with polite disagreement, thanked him for his thoroughness, and left the airport at 3:15 a.m., but they weren't satisfied with the official investigation. They launched their own inquiry using methods that airport security couldn't employ. Luis had driven south from Miami on Interstate 95, following a route he had memorized during months of preparation. The highway was nearly empty due to the storm. With only occasional trucks and emergency vehicles sharing the road, Luis maintained exactly the speed limit, used proper signals for lane changes, and avoided drawing attention from the Florida Highway Patrol officers, who were undoubtedly patrolling despite the weather. At 1:47 a.m., Luis exited the interstate at Homestead and drove through residential neighborhoods toward his cousin Roberto's auto repair shop. Roberto operated the business legitimately, specializing in repairs for the agricultural workers and service employees who formed the backbone of South Florida's economy. But Roberto also had connections to people who needed vehicles with flexible documentation, cash transactions that didn't appear in official records, and mechanical work that restored cars after they had been involved in activities that legitimate repair shops wouldn't handle. Luis parked behind the repair shop and used a key Roberto had provided weeks earlier. The shop was dark and empty, filled with the familiar scents of automotive equipment and the lingering odors of oil, gasoline, and metal. Roberto had left a note on his desk. Pickup truck outside keys under mat, papers in glove box. Good luck, cousin. The pickup truck was a 15-year-old Ford F-150 with 180,000 miles on the odometer. The registration showed ownership by a construction company that existed only on paper, providing layers of legal protection that would confuse investigators who tried to trace the vehicle's history. The truck was mechanically sound but forgettable, exactly the kind of vehicle that police officers would ignore during routine traffic stops. Luis transferred the travel bags from his Toyota to the pickup truck, placing them under a tarp along with construction tools and equipment that provided logical explanations for their presence. He wiped down every surface of the Toyota with bleach and cleaning rags, removing fingerprints and DNA evidence that might connect him to the vehicle after his disappearance. At 3:20 a.m., Luis abandoned the Toyota in a shopping center parking lot in Homestead, leaving the keys in the ignition and the doors unlocked. The car would be stolen or towed within hours, eliminating any connection to the airport theft and providing investigators with false leads that would waste time and resources. Luis drove the pickup truck south through the Florida Keys, following U.S. Highway 1 through a landscape of water, bridges, and small communities that existed primarily to serve tourists and fishing enthusiasts. The storm was moving out to sea, leaving behind clear skies and the humid warmth that characterized South Florida's climate. At sunrise, Luis was in Key West, the southernmost point of the continental United States, and a place where people frequently disappeared into the complicated geography of islands, boats, and international waters. He checked into a motel using fake identification he had purchased years earlier as insurance against deportation, paying cash for 3 nights and avoiding any interactions that might help witnesses remember his presence. Within 48 hours of the theft, the cartel's enforcers had arrived in Miami to conduct their own investigation. These men were specialists in recovering stolen property and punishing people who had made the mistake of stealing from their employers. They operated with methods that legitimate law enforcement couldn't use and asked questions that airport security had never considered. The lead investigator was a man known only as El Martillo, the Hammer, whose reputation for extracting information through torture was legendary throughout the criminal underworld. El Martillo was 45 years old, physically unremarkable, and capable of conducting interrogations that broke even experienced criminals within hours. El Martillo's team began by identifying every person who had been present in the VIP complex on April 11th. Airport security provided employment records, work schedules, and security footage that showed all personnel who had accessed the secure areas during the relevant time period. The list included security guards, maintenance staff, cleaning workers, and administrative personnel, approximately 30 people who had legitimate reasons to be in the area. The team conducted systematic interviews with each person on the list using techniques that were more aggressive than anything airport security had attempted. They weren't interested in official statements or documentation. They wanted to understand relationships, financial problems, personal motivations, and any factors that might explain why someone would risk stealing from a Mexican cartel. The first victim was Miguel Santos, a security supervisor who had been on duty during the night shift. Miguel was a family man with 20 years of airport experience and no criminal record. He had never seen the money, never heard conversations about money laundering, and had no knowledge of criminal activities in the VIP complex. But El Martillo's interrogation methods didn't depend on the victim's actual knowledge or guilt. The process was designed to extract information through pain, fear, and the gradual breakdown of psychological resistance. Miguel was kidnapped from his home, transported to a warehouse in Hialeah, and subjected to torture techniques that had been developed by intelligence agencies and refined by criminal organizations. Miguel died after 18 hours of interrogation without providing any useful information. His body was found 3 days later in a construction site, displaying injuries that served as a warning to other airport employees about the consequences of cooperation with law enforcement. The second victim was Carmen Rodriguez, a cleaning supervisor who managed the maintenance workers' schedules and work assignments. Carmen was a 58-year-old grandmother who had worked at the airport for 12 years. She knew every member of the cleaning staff personally and could provide detailed information about their backgrounds, work habits, and personal lives. Carmen's interrogation lasted longer because she had more potentially relevant information. She could describe the cleaning routines, the areas each maintenance worker was responsible for, and the personnel who had access to VIP Lounge 7, but she had no knowledge of the money laundering operation or the theft that had occurred. El Martillo's team learned about Luis Herrera during Carmen's interrogation. She described him as a reliable employee who worked the overnight shift, spoke little English, and kept to himself. Luis had been cleaning the VIP complex for 3 years without any disciplinary problems or suspicious behavior. Carmen had never seen him display unexpected wealth, discuss financial problems, or associate with people who might be involved in criminal activities. But Luis Herrera was fourth on their investigation list, and by the time they were ready to interview him, he had vanished completely. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode.